let's get into the first month of this crunching first quarter of 2023. We're almost getting over with the central bank announcing its first rate decision of the new year at 11 o'clock local time tomorrow, Tuesday, with Nigeria's headline inflation at a sluggish 21.34% last December, and the macroeconomy still looking for a breakout to the upside. The optics for a rate cut is on the downside. In the meantime, Nigerians will be heading to a general election in 30 days' time. So what's the playbook for the markets? Let's bring in a licensed dealer and CEO at Carry Asset Management, Johnson Chukwu, to chat to this conversation. A good evening to you, sir. Thanks very much for making this first day in the new week, Monday evening. Thank you so much. Hope you had a nice weekend. Give me your outlook on the first rate-setting meetings of the central bank that started today. What's your take at Carry Asset?
Yes, thank you, Bosin, for having me. Our take is that the Monetary Policy Committee will hold rates at current levels. Both the liquidity ratio, the cash reserve ratio, and the MP at the monetary policy ratio rates. We think they have to hold those rates at current levels, given the macroeconomic interplay we've witnessed in the past couple of weeks and past couple of few months.
Okay, so you think rates will be on hold. Why do you think rates should be on hold? Was that inflation that was a little bit skittish in December? Or you just think the central bank should be done by now as far as rate hike is concerned?
Yes, several factors, starting from the aspect you have just mentioned. Inflation had for the first time moderated by dropping from 21.47% to 21.34%, which has been the primary focus of the central bank, that they will continue to increase rates until inflation begins to moderate. And remember that inflation was not driven by excess liquidity occasioned by monetary expansion. So it was created by ways and means funding. But back to the key factor that MPC members will consider is that they also, because managing the economy is a delicate balancing act, you also consider the fact that the economy has slowed down in terms of growth. If you look at the third quarter GDP growth rate, there was a sharp decline from a 3.54% recorded in the second quarter of last year to a 2.25% recorded in the third quarter of last year. And we don't have the fourth quarter report so far, but of course, if you look at major sectors, we saw a major decline in the manufacturing sector. These are driven by largely high input costs and high interest costs, because central bank has withdrawn many of its intervention funds, or adjusted interest rate from 5% to 9% for those intervention funds. And commercial banks are lending at above 20%. So I think the right thing they would do is to hold rates at current levels and watch the current macroeconomic environment adjust further. Hopefully, we should expect that the moderation we saw in inflation rate will not be a one-off. Of course, we know there are pressures coming from energy supply, energy cost. We know price of fuel has gone to as much as 300 naira in some locations, and this will impact on subsequent months' inflation figures.
But how are investors pricing in the country's political and electoral environment to their investment decisions? We have just about 30 days to this very major political milestone in terms of election. How are investors? What are you hearing on the ground? What's their sentiments right now?
Well, for foreign investors, they've stayed out of the market for quite some time. They are not likely to come in until after the election. For local investors, most investors are now playing at the short end of the fixed income space. So that's why you have a lot of people want to keep their money in fixed deposit. A lot of people want to buy short-term treasury bills. They are holding their money, their funds, largely in short-end money market instruments, or short maturing money market instruments. Of course, the institutional investors like the pension fund administrators might have a slightly different approach to it. They are still looking for bargain hunting opportunities in the equity space. They are still buying up long-term debt instruments that have relatively good yield. But for individual HNIs, that's high net worth investors, most of them are staying in the short end of the market, largely money market instruments.
So, but how's the equity? Oh, you just talked about it, but give me a bit of a more, because January now we're looking at these issues on our hands, and I'm asking, Do you think we're going to get some earnings to be part of the conversation this month? Once we're done with this week, we just got about 1 or 2 more days next week to cross into February. So do you think sentiments will still remain a little bit positive for the markets, as it were, as we begin to see the final days into the elections? Or you think more folks will go into cash in their pockets? But I'm not too sure how much cash they will have with the central bank reining in withdrawals according to as far as the new Naira notes is concerned. So how much do you think all of this put together could impact what disposable income or whatever I have that could go as a retail investor into equities or even the short end of the fixed income space?
Yes, I mean, for retail investors, for HNI investors, the short end of the market, money market instrument remain the most attractive, given the fact that we are in a political election season. And as you all know, when there's heightened political or economic social risk, investors would rather play, they say cash is king. They would rather hold their instruments, their investment in cash or near cash forms. So I think for retail investors, they're going to remain in that space. For institutional investors, the bargain hunting opportunity still remains. Opportunities to lock in on instruments, equity instruments that have good dividend payout prospects is still quite strong. Of course, we saw third quarter results by several companies. We are quite positive. We saw even institutions that we are not used to paying interim dividend last year. So in terms of performance of quoted companies, we should expect that as we move towards the benefit season, but for the election that's coming up next month, people would have been actually betting on a lot of equity instruments in preparation or ahead of the benefit season. But because of the election, some people will want to be risk averse. Who are risk averse will stay on the sidelines and watch until after the election. But I think immediately after the election, if the election goes as many people are predicting, you should see a major scramble for Nigerian equity instruments.
But what is responsible for this huge liquidity in the financial system right now? Where is that money going into?
Well, 2 factors. I had mentioned that many HNIs and many retail investors are staying in the short end of the market. They are either leaving their money in placements with the banks or in some form of short maturing liquid assets. Then, if you recall, only last week, the Federal Election Account Allocation Committee met and disbursed 990 billion naira, one of the highest they've done in the recent past. That's almost 1 trillion naira. And that money is currently in the banking system. Virtually all the states have gotten the allocations, the local government have gotten the allocations, and they have not drawn many of them. Most of them have not drawn on that, given also the constraints in making withdrawals imposed by the central bank as a result of the limits to withdrawals and the fact that you can't withdraw cash from a government accounts now. So that's part of the reasons why you've seen a lot of system liquidity in the banking industry.
So what will tomorrow's interest rate decision mean for the economy and the market? And do you think investors should factor in the political risks, perhaps wait until the results of the February 25th elections, then see whatever happens in the month of March? Then we'll say effectively we're done with the first quarter.
Well, I think many investors that are discerning, also risk averse, will rather stay on the sidelines, hold their instruments in easily convertible form, which is cash or near cash, and wait for the February 25th election. That's the critical election we're going to have. Once that election is successful and the outcome is positive according to the expectation of Nigerians, investors can take positions. I think in terms of investment instruments, I've been very clear, stay in the short end of the market, watch out for the outcome of the election. And I believe, however the election goes, I mean, once the election is concluded and a candidate is announced as an elected president, the new president of the country, investors will begin to take position because they will automatically gauge their expectation from that particular candidate or the newly elected president.
Oh, quite a lot on the horizon. Are investors really worried about the elections? Just some thoughts to wrap it up.
No, interestingly, Bosin, for the first time, I would say that Nigerians are not so concerned whether the election will be successful or not. Somehow, INEC has been able to imbue some level of confidence among Nigerians that the election will be transparent, will be free and fair, and that the outcome will reflect the will of majority of Nigerians. So you can see some level of relaxed attitude towards election. There's not so much of apprehension. There's not so much of tension as it relates to infighting between political parties, other than the abuses we are seeing in the media. But for the first time, I think Nigerians have confidence that the election outcome will reflect their voting.
Johnson, look, Johnson, and I'm going to differ from you that when politicians decide to abuse themselves, maybe they shouldn't do it in the media, so that you folks don't blame us and say when they abuse themselves in the media. They could just do that in their private meetings and leave us out of it. Our job is just to report how things go. But again, if they abuse themselves, politics is what it is.
When interestingly, they are creating some form of comic relief for all of us. Because when you see adults abusing themselves as children in kindergarten, you just have to laugh the stress of lack of fuel away from your mind and relieve yourself of the pressure.
Lack of fuel. We need a political fuel because you can't get a fuel into your generator or car or whatever. So we need a political fuel, and that's a whole lot. We can use with some comedy relief, as you said. But let this all work out in February. Let's see how it goes. We're counting down. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. And we're going to touch base with you as we get into the elections. Johnson Chukwu, thank you so much for those insights. You'll read decisions tomorrow and the macroeconomists. Have a great evening.